The words still burned in my ears, sharp as the crack of a whip. My father, Henry, delivered them with the kind of smug finality that only a man who'd spent his life hoarding control could muster. I stood in the kitchen of his our old house, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles whitened. The linoleum was peeling. The air smelled of stale coffee, and the clock above the sink ticked too loudly, counting down to a confrontation I'd avoided for years. "You heard me, David," he said, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed. His voice was gravelly, weathered by decades of shouting over construction sites and barking orders at anyone who dared question him. "If you want to stay here, it's $2,000 a month. I'm not running a charity." I stared at him. My father, the man who'd raised me in this very house, now treating me like some deadbeat tenant. I was 42, unemployed for the first time in 2 decades, and freshly divorced. My life had unraveled faster than a cheap sweater, and I'd come back to this small Ohio town seeking refuge. Not a landlord. But Henry wasn't offering a home anymore, was offering a transaction. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice low, trying to keep the anger from spilling over. "This is my home too. I grew up here." "Was your home," he corrected, pointing a calloused finger at me. "You left. You made your choices. Now you're back, eating my food, using my water, acting like you're entitled to it all. Pay up or get out." The words hit like a punch to the gut. I'd come back because I had nowhere else to go. My ex-wife, Sarah, had taken the house in the divorce, along with most of my savings. My job as a mid-level manager at a dying factory had vanished when the company downsized. I was broken, and staring at a father who saw me as a burden. But I wasn't a kid anymore, and I wasn't about to beg. "Fine," I said, my jaw tight. "I'll figure it out." I stormed out of the kitchen, the screen door slamming behind me. The porch creaked under my weight as I sat on the steps, staring at the overgrown lawn. This house, with its chipped paint and sagging gutters, held every memory of my childhood mom's laughter, my old bike rusting in the garage, the summers we'd spent rebuilding the fence together. But Mom was gone now, and Henry had changed. He'd always been stubborn, but this was something colder. I didn't have $2,000. I barely had $200. But as I sat there, the seed of an idea took root, one born of desperation and a flicker of defiance. If Henry wanted to play hardball, I'd play dirtier. This house wasn't just his, it was mine, too, in ways he couldn't erase. I'd find a way to stay, and I wouldn't pay a dime. The next morning, I woke up on the lumpy couch in the living room, my back aching and my mind racing. The house was quiet, save for the distant clatter of Henry in the kitchen. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. I started by digging through the attic, where Mom used to keep her old files and photo albums. If there was anything at all that could give me leverage, it'd be there. The attic was a time capsule of dust and memories. I found my old baseball glove, a stack of yellowed letters, and a box labeled Important Docs. My heart skipped as I opened it. Inside were deeds, tax records, and a will, Mom's will. I skimmed it, my pulse quickening. She'd left the house to both of us, Henry and me, with a clause that neither could sell or claim full ownership without the other's consent. Henry had never mentioned this. He'd let me believe the house was his alone. I sat back on my heels, the paper trembling in my hands. This was my leverage. If Henry wanted to treat me like a tenant, I'd treat him like a roommate, one he couldn't evict. But I needed more than a piece of paper. I needed to understand why he was doing this, why he'd turned so cold. Was it just the money? Or was there something deeper? something I'd missed in the years I'd been gone. That afternoon, I drove to the local library, the only place in town with free Wi-Fi and a printer. I spent hours researching property laws, tenant rights, and inheritance disputes. My head spun with legal jargon. But one thing was clear: the will gave me a claim, and I could use it to fight back. I printed out a few key pages and tucked them into my jacket. If Henry wanted a war, I'd come prepared. When I got back, he was in the garage, tinkering with an old radio. The sight of him, hunched over his workbench, brought back a flood of memories: him teaching me how to use a hammer, the smell of sawdust, his rare, gruff praise when I got something right. For a moment, I wanted to let it all go, to just talk to him. But then I remembered his words: pay up or get out. Dad, I said, stepping into the garage, we need to talk about the house. He didn't look up. Nothing to talk about. You got the money. No, I said, holding up the will. But I've got this. His eyes narrowed as he saw the paper. For the first time, I saw a flicker of unease in his face. Where'd you get that? Mom's things. You never told me she left the house to both of us. He set down his tools, his jaw tightening. That's old news. I've been paying the taxes, the bills, keeping this place standing. You think you can waltz in and claim it? I'm not claiming anything, I said, my voice steady. I'm staying, and I'm not paying you a cent. The air between us crackled with tension. I didn't know it then, but that moment was the start of a battle that would change us both. Fight not just for a house, but for what it meant to be family. Henry's face hardened, his eyes boring into mine like he could will me out of existence. The garage smelled of oil and rust, a familiar scent that once meant safety but now felt like a battlefield. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag, and took a step toward me. You think you can play lawyer with me, boy? He said, his voice low and dangerous. This house is mine. I've bled for it. You've bled for it. I shot back, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. What about Mom? What about me? I was here too. Dad, I helped paint these walls. I mowed the lawn every summer. This isn't just your castle. He scoffed, tossing the rag onto the workbench. You left, David. You ran off to your fancy life with Sarah. And now you're back because it all fell apart. Don't act like you've earned a stake here. His words stung, not because they were wrong, but because they were half true. I had left, chasing a life I thought would be better. But I wasn't the only one who'd made choices. And you stayed here, pushing everyone away. I said, Mom died, and you turned into this miser. What happened to you? He flinched, just for a second, but it was enough to tell me I'd hit a nerve. He turned back to his radio, pretending I wasn't there. Get out of my garage, he muttered. I didn't move. Not until we settle this. The will says I own half this house. You can't charge me rent for what's already mine. He spun around, his face red. You want to talk legal? Fine. I'll call my lawyer tomorrow. We'll see who's got a claim. I left the garage, my heart pounding. I'd won this round, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like I'd just declared war on the only family I had left. Over the next few days, the house became a silent battleground. Henry and I avoided each other, moving through the rooms like ghosts. I slept on the couch, my suitcase still unpacked, a constant reminder that I wasn't welcome. But I wasn't leaving. Not yet. I started digging deeper, not just into legal documents, but into Henry himself. I remembered how he used to beg rough but kind, always fixing things, always teaching me how to stand up for myself. After Mom died 10 years ago, he'd retreated into himself, like a house boarded up against a storm. I'd been too caught up in my own life to notice how far he'd drifted. Now, I needed answers. I called my old friend Mike, who'd stayed in town and worked at the county clerk's office. "Can you pull some records on my dad's house?" I asked over coffee at the diner. "Tax history, liens, anything weird?" Mike raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to poke that bear? Your dad's not exactly the forgiving type." "I don't have a choice," I said. "He's trying to charge me rent to live in my own house." Mike promised to look into it. And a few days later, he called me back. "Your dad's been paying the property taxes. But there's something odd," he said. "There's a lien on the house from a loan he took out 5 years ago. He's behind on payments. If he doesn't clear it soon, the bank could foreclose." I felt a mix of shock and vindication. Henry wasn't just being greedy, was desperate. The $2,000 rent wasn't about me. It was about saving his own skin. But why hadn't he told me? Why was he pushing me away instead of asking for help? I confronted him that evening in the living room, where he was watching an old Western on TV. "Dad, why didn't you tell me about the lien?" I asked, holding up the printout Mike had given me. He froze, the remote slipping from his hand. "Where'd you get that?" he demanded. "Doesn't matter. Why are you hiding this? The bank could take the house." "It's my problem," he snapped, standing up. "Not yours. You don't get to swoop in and play hero." "I'm not trying to be a hero," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm trying to save our home. Why won't you let me help?" He looked at me, his eyes flashing with something I couldn't read: anger, shame, maybe both. "Because you left," he said quietly. "You left me here alone." The words hung in the air, heavy with years of unspoken pain. I realized then that this wasn't just about money or a house. It was about a father and son who'd lost each other long before I came back. The silence that followed Henry's words was suffocating. I stood in the living room, the TV flickering with gunshots and hoofbeats. But all I could hear was the echo of his accusation. "You left me here alone." It wasn't just about me moving away for college or marriage. It was about the years I'd let slip by without a call, a visit, a single effort to bridge the gap. I'd thought he was fine, that he wanted space. I'd been wrong. "Dad," I said, my voice softer now, "I didn't mean to abandon you. I thought you didn't need me." He turned away, his shoulders rigid. "Don't need your pity now," he muttered, sinking back into his recliner. "Just pay the rent or get out." I wanted to scream, to shake him until he talked to me like a father, not a landlord. But I saw the tremor in his hands, the way his eyes avoided mine. He wasn't just angry, he was scared. Scared of losing the house. Scared of admitting he needed help. Scared of facing me after all these years. I left him there and went to the porch. The cool night air a relief against the heat of my frustration. I needed a new approach. Fighting him head-on wasn't working. I had to find a way to save the house without tearing us apart. The next morning, I drove to the bank. The lien was real $30,000, taken out 5 years ago to cover medical bills after Henry's knee surgery. He'd missed payments for over a year, and the bank was circling like vultures. The clerk, a kind woman named Linda, explained my options. I could pay off the lien myself, but I'd need to prove my claim to the house. The will was a start, but I'd need Henry's cooperation to avoid a legal mess. I spent the rest of the day making calls, piecing together a plan. I reached out to a local lawyer, Susan, who specialized in property disputes. She agreed to review the will and the lien for a small fee. which I scraped together from my dwindling savings. You've got a strong case, she told me over the phone. But if your father fights you, it could drag on for years. Try to work it out with him first. Work it out. Easier said than done. Henry wasn't the type to negotiate, especially not with me. But I had to try. I started small, doing things around the house, fixing the leaky faucet, mowing the lawn, painting the peeling porch. I wasn't just trying to prove a point. I wanted him to see I wasn't the freeloader he thought I was. I wanted him to see his son. One evening, I found him in the backyard, staring at Mom's old garden, now overrun with weeds. I grabbed a pair of gloves and started pulling them out, not saying a word. He watched me for a while, then picked up a shovel and joined in. We worked in silence. The only sounds the rustle of leaves and the scrape of metal against dirt. It wasn't much, but it felt like a crack in the wall between us. Why are you doing this? He asked finally, his voice gruff but curious. Because it's home, I said, not looking up. And because Mom would have wanted it. He didn't respond, but he kept digging. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Susan called a few days later with news. The will is airtight, she said. You and your father are co-owners. He can't legally charge you rent without your consent, and he can't sell the house without your signature. But the lien complicates things. If you want to save the house, you'll need to pay it off or negotiate with the bank. I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. I didn't have $30. But I had something Henry didn't: time and desperation. I started looking for work. Anything that could bring in cash. The factory was gone, but I found a part-time gig at a hardware store, stocking shelves and helping customers. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That night, I sat Henry down at the kitchen table. Dad, we can save the house, I said, laying out the bank's terms and Susan's advice. But we have to work together. I'll pay what I can, but I need you to meet me halfway. He stared at the table, his fingers tracing the grain of the wood. Why do you care so much? He asked quietly. You've got no life here. You could start over somewhere else. Because this is where Mom was, I said, my voice breaking. And because you're still here. For the first time, I saw something soften in his eyes. It wasn't surrender, but it was a start. Henry didn't say much after that night, but something shifted. He stopped mentioning the rent, and I caught him watching me sometimes. His expression unreadable but less hostile. We weren't exactly mending fences, but we were at least sharing the same side of them. I kept working at the hardware store, saving every penny I could, while quietly researching ways to tackle the lien. The house was still at risk, and I wasn't naive enough to think Henry's silence meant he'd given up his stubbornness. One morning, I found an old photo tucked inside a book on the living room shelf. Mom, Henry, and me, standing in front of the house the day we moved in. I was 6, grinning with a missing tooth, while Mom laughed and Henry held her hand, his face softer than I'd ever remembered. I slipped the photo into my pocket, a reminder of what I was fighting for. This house wasn't just brick and mortar, it was the last piece of us as a family. I decided to push harder. I called the bank again, negotiating a payment plan. Linda, the clerk, was sympathetic but firm. You can start with monthly payments, she said, but you'll need your father's signature since he's the primary on the loan. I thanked her and hung up, knowing that getting Henry to sign anything would be like pulling teeth. That evening, I found him in the garage, sanding down an old chair. Dad, I said, holding out the bank's paperwork. They'll let us pay off the lien in installments. We can save the house, but I need you to sign this. He barely glanced at it. I'm not signing anything, he said, his voice flat. I don't trust banks. And I don't trust you to stick around. The words cut, but I didn't back down. I'm not going anywhere, I said. I'm here. Dad. I'm trying. Why won't you? He stopped sanding, his hand still. You don't get it, do you? He said, his voice low. This house is all I've got left of her. If I lose it, I lose her. I froze, the photo in my pocket suddenly heavy. You think I don't feel that too? I said. Mom's gone, but I'm still here. You're still here. We don't have to lose each other too. He looked at me, his eyes glistening, and for a moment, I thought he might break. But he just shook his head and went back to sanding. Do what you want, David. Just don't expect me to make it easy. I didn't give up. I started paying what I could toward the lien, using my hardware store wages. It wasn't enough to stop the bank's threats, but it bought us time. I also kept working on the house, fixing the roof, cleaning out the basement, even planting new flowers in Mom's garden. I wasn't just trying to save the property. I was trying to show Henry I was in this for good. One afternoon, while I was painting the front door, a neighbor stopped by, Mrs. Carter, who'd lived across the street since I was a kid. You're doing a fine job, David, she said, her voice warm. Your mom would be proud. Thanks, I said, forcing a smile. I'm just trying to keep the place standing. She glanced at the house, then back at me. Henry's been struggling since your mom passed. He won't say it, but he's lonely. Maybe he's pushing you away because he's scared you'll leave again. Her words hit hard. I'd been so focused on the house, on the lien, on my own hurt, that I hadn't fully seen Henry's side. He wasn't just fighting me, he was fighting the fear of being abandoned again. That night, I tried a different approach. I cooked dinner Mom's old meatloaf recipe, the one she used to make for Sunday nights. I set the table and called Henry in. He hesitated, then sat down, eyeing the food like it was a trap. We ate in silence at first, the clink of forks deafening. Remember when Mom used to make this? I said finally, breaking the quiet. He nodded, his expression softening. She always put in too much onion, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I laughed, and for a moment, it felt like old times. I'm not leaving, Dad, I said quietly. Not this time. But we've got to work together to keep this place. He didn't respond, but he didn't argue either. It was progress, small but real. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance. Henry and I weren't exactly reconciled, but we'd settled into a fragile truce. I kept working at the hardware store, funneling every spare dollar into the lien payments. The bank was patient, but the clock was ticking. I knew we couldn't keep this up forever, not without Henry's help. But getting him to budge felt like trying to move a mountain. I started noticing small changes in him, though. He'd linger in the kitchen while I cooked, offering gruff suggestions about seasoning. He'd sit on the porch while I worked on the garden, pretending to read the paper but watching me out of the corner of his eye. Once, I caught him fixing a loose step on the porch, something I'd planned to do myself. He didn't say anything about it, and neither did I, but it felt like a crack in his armor. One evening, I found an old toolbox in the basement Henry's, from his days as a contractor. Inside were his old sketches, plans for houses he'd built, including ours. I brought them to the kitchen table, spreading them out. You designed this place, I said when he walked in. I forgot how good you were at this. He glanced at the sketches, his expression unreadable. That was a long time ago, he said, but he didn't walk away. He sat down, tracing the lines with a calloused finger. Your mom loved this house. Said it was the only place she ever felt safe. I nodded, my throat tight. I feel that too. That's why I'm fighting for it. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. You really mean that, don't you? I do, I said. But I can't do it alone. For the first time, he didn't argue. He just nodded and went back to the sketches, lost in memories I couldn't touch. A few days later, Susan, the lawyer, called with a breakthrough. The bank's willing to settle the lien for $20. 000 if you can pay it by the end of the month. She said, it's a discount, but it's still a lot. Can you swing it? I didn't have $20. 000. But I wasn't about to let this chance slip. I started looking for ways to raise the money selling my old car, taking on extra shifts, even considering a loan of my own. But the real hurdle was Henry. I needed him to sign off on the settlement, and I needed him to trust me. I found him in the garage, working on that same old radio. Dad, I said, laying out Susan's news. The bank will cut the lien to $20. 000. We can save the house, but you have to sign the agreement. He set down his tools, his face a mix of suspicion and exhaustion. And what happens when you leave again? He asked. I'm left with the debt, and you're gone. I'm not leaving, I said, my voice firm. I've been here, Dad. I've been paying, fixing, fighting. I'm in this. He stared at me for a long moment, then picked up the radio again. I'll think about it, he said. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. I took it as a win. The deadline loomed closer, and I threw myself into raising the money. I sold the car for $5. 000. Took every extra shift I could, and even started doing odd jobs around town fixing fences, painting sheds, anything to scrape together cash. I was exhausted, but every dollar felt like a step toward keeping the house. One night, I came home to find Henry at the kitchen table, the bank's paperwork in front of him. He looked up as I walked in, his face unreadable. You're serious about this? He said, more a statement than a question. Dead serious, I said, sitting across from him. This is our home, Dad. I'm not letting it go. He pushed the papers toward me, his signature scrawled at the bottom. Don't make me regret this, he said. I stared at the signature, my chest tight with relief and something deeper hope. I won't, I promised. With Henry's signature, the path to saving the house was clearer, but the $20, 000 hurdle still loomed. I had $8, 000 from selling the car and extra shifts, but the clock was merciless. 2 weeks left, and I was running out of options. I couldn't ask Henry for money. He'd already given more than I'd expected by signing the papers. This was on me. I started thinking outside the box. The house itself was a resource. We had a big backyard, a garage full of tools, and a neighborhood full of people who'd known us for decades. I remembered Mrs. Carter's words about Henry's loneliness and my own resolve to stay. Maybe the answer wasn't just money, it was community. I organized a yard sale, pulling out everything we didn't need: old furniture, tools, even some of Mom's knickknacks I knew Henry wouldn't miss. I spread the word around town, and by Saturday, the lawn was buzzing with neighbors. Mrs. Carter brought cookies. Mike from the clerk's office bought an old lamp, and even kids from the block showed up, curious. By the end of the day, I'd raised $3, 000. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Henry watched from the porch, his arms crossed, his expression a mix of skepticism and surprise. Didn't think you'd get this far, he said as I counted the cash. I'm not done yet, I replied, meeting his gaze. For the first time, I saw a flicker of respect in his eyes. The next step was riskier. I'd been talking to Mike about local grants for historic homes. Our house wasn't exactly a landmark, but it was old enough to qualify for a preservation fund. I spent hours at the library, filling out applications, writing essays about the house's history, how Henry had built it, how Mom had made it a home. I poured my heart into it, hoping someone would see what it meant to us. A week later, I got a call. The town council approved a $10,000 grant, contingent on us maintaining the house as a community asset hosting events, keeping it in good repair. It was a lifeline, but it came with strings. I showed Henry the letter, bracing for a fight. They want us to open our home to strangers. He grumbled, scanning the terms. Not strangers, I said. Neighbors. People who care about this place. Like we do. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. I took it as permission to move forward. With the grant and the yard sale money, I was close $18,000. I needed $2,000 more, and I had 3 days. I took a chance and went back to the hardware store, asking my boss for an advance. He hesitated but agreed, seeing how hard I'd been working. You're a good man, David, he said, handing me the check. Don't let this town down. I drove straight to the bank, the paperwork and cash in hand. Linda smiled as I handed everything over. You did it, she said, stamping the documents. The lien's cleared. The house is yours. Ours, I corrected, thinking of Henry. That night, I found Henry in the backyard, sitting by Mom's garden, now blooming with the flowers I'd planted. I sat next to him, the silence between us comfortable for the first time in months. It's done, I said. The house is safe. He nodded, his eyes on the flowers. You didn't have to do all this, he said quietly. I didn't make it easy. No, you didn't, I said, smiling. But it's home. And you're my dad. He looked at me, his face softer than I'd seen in years. I'm sorry, he said, the words heavy with years of regret. I didn't know how to ask for help. I know, I said. But we're here now. We sat there as the sun set. The house behind us no longer a battleground, but a bridge one we'd rebuilt together. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was home.